For the past 25 years, Otis Gene Gibson has been equipping Christians around the world in the vital ministry of pastoral and evangelistic visitation. Fairhaven Ministries is now pleased to present this training as a video course. And now our instructor, Gene Gibson.
Perhaps you'll remember being a child, one of your favorite childhood games. In fact, I'll confess that I still play this game with my grandchildren, and they're quite delighted with it when I do that, although it may seem a little peculiar for me to be playing that at my age, but they get hysterical with laughter and joy. And it's called hide and seek. They just love to play hide and seek. Don't see any country, any culture. Now, in children, that's really cute and lots of fun, but when you get adults playing hide and seek, it's just a little bit different, and it's not always fun. It's particularly questionable when you're trying to play hide and seek with God. If you recall, in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, that's where the practice begins, in which after the fall of our first parents, God comes down and seeks Adam, and he said, "Adam, where are you?" He wasn't asking him for a geographic location. And he followed up and he said, "What have you done?" And we begin to see a pattern of excuse-making. Well, it's the woman you gave me. That's one of the oldest, isn't it? I was doing just fine until you brought that woman into my life. And the woman says, "Well, it was the serpent that got me all confused and mixed up." They began to try to hide, and they had done that previously, physically, and even going so far as to start trying to use a fig leaf to cover their nakedness. And this is a practice of fallen human nature that's been going on ever since. We can say that, in a sense, wearing a fig leaf, I don't know why they would worry about being naked in the presence of their Creator. I suppose it was the first effort to do what is known as putting up a front. When it's involved in building, we call it a facade. That's a very fancy facing on a building that's quite old and broken down. It's a facade. We say we're putting on a facade. You would wonder that anyone that was intelligent that could think for a moment that you could hide from God, who is, first of all, omnipresent or omniscience, just to think of that. The psalmist knew different in Psalm 139. He said, "Whither shall I flee from thy spirit?" And he enumerates, if you go to the depths of the sea, he'll find you, or to the uttermost place where beams of light go, he will discover you. He is the inescapable God, sometimes called, you recall the poets that called him the Hound of Heaven. You cannot escape God. You cannot hide from him. It is utterly impossible. And so the effort is ridiculous, although all kinds of people try to do that. I think sometimes that some people may not be aware that they're in the process of trying to hide from God, or they're trying to hide perhaps their true feelings from you. The psychologists call it denial. They're in a state of denial. It's a form of hiding or denying something. We have a series of patterns that are recognizable. For example, if we're doing what we want to do, then we're going to defend that way. That's quite understandable. Jonah is an example of that in chapter 4, in which he is obviously upset with the kindness of God to the people of Nineveh. He said, "I know the kind of God you are. I just knew you were going to do something like this and go and show them grace and mercy." And he's upset because he doesn't like them in the first place. And then God asked the question, he said, do you have a right to be angry? And surprisingly, he says, "Yeah, I do have a right to be angry." He defends it, being angry with God. If you find that things are not going well, of course, characteristically, you're going to blame others. I went through this yesterday and today with a woman concerning her daughter, who's despite the most gross irresponsibility, is blaming everybody else and convincing her mother that it is so. innocence. We find Adam and Eve blaming others. Most ridiculous example of this is in the life of Aaron in the Exodus and the golden calf. And Moses comes down and asks him, he said, how is it that you're down? How did you have this golden calf? How did you come about to have it? And he has this marvelous explanation. Well, these people came and they gave me all these golden ornaments. I don't know why. And I just didn't know what to do. And I threw it in the fire, and then out came this golden calf. I just don't understand it. Now, I don't know who in the world that he thought he was going to deceive by such a ridiculous story. Hiding his own guilt and responsibility. If something is unpleasant, we want to avoid it. That's another form of it. Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh, and he tried to avoid it with tragic results. Elijah feared the wrath of Jezebel and fled from her. He wanted to avoid having to deal with her. If we have a bad attitude, we want to pretend always, no, I don't have a bad attitude. My attitude is just fine. It's very difficult, but here's what we must bear in mind, and that is we must not be impatient, and we must resist the temptation to correct people immediately or point out what they're doing. The greatest encouragement to me in this respect is the characteristic of God called the long-suffering of God. We think of this in connection with the people of Noah's days and many other. And I often sense that in his pastoral dealings as the great shepherd with people, that our God has an enormous degree of long-suffering, which is a constant inspiration to me when I really do get impatient with certain people for persistent misconduct. Therefore, what we need to do is, first of all, to recognize the symptoms of hiding and evading. They're very common, they're easy to recognize, so we need to simply take note of when this process is going on, and within ourselves, not to them, ask, now why is that? Why are they evasive about this area? I had this yesterday with a woman. I asked her 3 times, I said, where is your daughter living? And 3 times she evaded the question. Well, she was living in a place where she didn't want her daughter to be known. She evaded it 3 times. Very obvious. We're not trying to accuse people. We're not trying to overpower people. We're trying to see a work of the Spirit. But we do want to, in whatever we can, encourage people to be honest with God, and as we'll see later, to therefore be honest with us. The first great symptom of hiding and evading is called a show of uneasiness. It's a nervous movement. Sometimes it's a facial expression. Sometimes it's what they say. Uneasiness. It's because in all probability you're drawing near a vital spiritual issue of some kind, and they think you're going to get too close to something, or maybe you have already, as we say, using the terminology of a dentist, hit a nerve. This sensitive reaction comes because we are touching on a principle there, on an issue there, is beginning to hurt and that they would rather not deal with. The principle of the equipment called lie detector works on that. And the idea is that they will ask a series of unimportant questions. And then right in the middle of a long series of questions in which they're answering simply yes or no, they'll ask a critical question near the issue. And when the detector, which is a form of electrocardiogram, jumps, or there's a change in the tracing, that is an indication of at least a possible lie. That's how the lie detector works. They're sensitive in that area. What do? Well, of course, you want to set them at ease. It may be just a temporary thing. It may be something that we can overcome. We're very interested in relaxing people. We don't want to come on and appear as threatening or accusing and things like that. And the more relaxed we are, the less accusatorial we are, the more apt we are to overcome this and hopefully an initial uneasiness. Sometimes people are uneasy just because you come around the house. A woman particularly, well, she says, well, her house is not quite as neat as you would like it, or she doesn't have her hair fixed right, or something like that. And we have an opportunity to set them at ease, which is what we want to do. Very important when we talk to people about critical issues that we're all relaxed as much as we can be. And there are what are called lame excuses. You perhaps are probing a prolonged absence from the meetings of the church, and they've been very active before. And they say, well, we've been out of town. We've been sick. We've been helping and working with our relatives, so we haven't been out recently. 6 months? 3 months? That's a long time for something like this to apply. It reminds me when a business contacts a person who hasn't paid a bill promptly. It's astounding the excuses people offer without realizing that anybody who's coming around to collect a bill has already heard all those excuses many times before. Well, we didn't get it. It was lost in the mail. My wife takes care of all those things. You know, I'm shocked at this. I'll check with my bookkeeper and I'll send you a check tomorrow. They don't realize you've heard that 100 times. Lame comes from like a lame old horse or a lame animal. It's so lame that it can hardly walk. It's incredibly lame. It's ridiculous. In fact, it's been said that an excuse is a reason stuffed with a lie. I think that sometimes the best thing in the world you can do with a lame excuse is just pause, briefly ignore it, and get back on the track. I don't think it deserves an answer. Certainly it's very significant when people change the subject, especially if they change it repeatedly. You heard an example of that just about a week ago in the meeting, and the parents of this man in the meeting who were not Christians were here. And so one of the elders was there and talking to her, who happens to be here tonight, and he began to move into the spiritual subject, and 3 times she brought up what a beautiful tie he was wearing. I told him later that he ought to get rid of that tie because it was a hindrance to evangelistic work, really. Well, the problem was not her fascination with this tie, that she just didn't want to talk about those spiritual things. It's a conversational detour. It's a get away from a subject that they really don't want to talk about. Now, our point there is not to force them, but in our minds to ask ourselves why. Maybe we can ask them the question, is this something that you just rather not talk about? That's so shocking, and they really don't want to say yes. Oh, no, not at all. I'm very happy to talk about that. That's one of the things you always want to pretend that that's something that is true is not true in a situation like that. Because I don't want you to talk about it. It's something that you'd rather not talk about. Criticizing others, classic warning sign, red flag, blinking red light. When you're drawing near a critical issue. Why at this point do they want to bring up an issue of criticizing somebody else? It's called blame shifting. Somebody they have a grievance against. Sometimes they've been offended. Something they don't like. We had a woman very upset with us, and she went around and she professed to be very upset about the fact that the gardening wasn't being done properly in one of the houses next door. And that she went around and she took pictures of it, and she showed how disreputable the thing was. Well, it was hard for me to believe that she was so upset about a few weeds. That really wasn't her real problem, but she wanted to make it a major issue, as if gardening and landscaping was a principal thing going on here. They just made it intolerable for her. The truth of the matter is, she was interested in a greater social life, especially with the opposite sex. That was what was involved. We need to listen thoughtfully to anything that is not slander and is not gossip. We shouldn't be listening to that, and excuse ourselves when we get into that. When they begin to criticize someone, we need to say something like this: is there something you need to take up directly with that person so that you can settle it? You know, there's a provision in the Bible when you have a problem with someone else. It's stated in Scripture that you should go to that person and express it. Maybe you'll be able to help them out. Maybe you'll be able to settle this thing instead of just having it eat at you, because the fact that it eats at you is not good for you. A variation of this is called, number 5, it's called past injustices. It's the same situation, except then it goes and digs up something from the past. You go back into history. Your parents did this to you. They shoved religion down your throat. They made you go to Sunday school. Church people, the minister ran off with the organist or something like that. Somebody else did something. I saw that this man was an official of the church, and I knew that he was a hypocrite. It's good to say, well, I understand it. I understand what it is to be offended by the actions or words of certain people. I've been offended myself by some things. However, I understood that I did not want to let this offense drive me away from being close to God or God's people. Now here is an opportunity to use what we call indirection. I'm going to explain that very briefly, what we mean by indirection. And that is, you want to address this person and the problem that they have, but rather than talk to them directly about their attitude, you want to, in a sense, relate an incident about yourself, because people don't mind you saying things about yourself. They can sit still for that when they can't have you saying things about them. And indirection is that I speak about something, some experience that I have, and then they perhaps can draw the lesson from it. I might say that I was greatly offended at a person sometime, but I recognize that for my own peace with God and my own walk and peace of mind, that I needed to put that thing behind me. I need to forgive. I needed to forget. I needed to forget the things that are past. I need to forgive them in my heart, because I don't want anything to affect my walk with Jesus now. And I realized that I had to do something about it. I didn't want it to be a major obstacle in my relationship to the Lord at the present time. That's why I really dealt with it within myself, and I put it behind me. That was the thing that helped me greatly. What do you think about that? Now, in doing that, I'm not saying they're doing a wrong thing. I'm pointing out, in my experience, I found out how helpful it was to do the right thing. Number 6 is to avoid commitment. We are looking at people for what we might call specific willingness to deal with important matters. Not general willingness, specific willingness. And where the gospel is concerned, and where salvation is concerned, and coming to Christ is concerned, the person must be willing and desirous to do that. It's not something we can force on them. It may be some aspect of the way they live or their lifestyle, whether they have a genuine desire to change. The question is not that their lifestyle doesn't please us. That's not really the issue. Do they see the need to change? If they do, in order to be right with God? not to be right with me. Perhaps they needed to take stock of themselves, whether they really, so to speak, are God seekers, or whether they're just going along in life. We're not there to force them to make decisions. That's not our job. If they are sincere, and if they are generally open, but they still don't want to make a commitment at this time, then we can think in terms of a short-term goal, something they can do soon. Well, if you are interested and you don't want to make a decision now, would you be willing to take part in a home Bible study? Would you be willing to come over to my house for dinner where we can talk about spiritual things? Would you be willing to do that? Maybe, perhaps if I called you in the coming week and give you an invitation, would it be right for me to do that? Would you be open to that? I don't want to force you to do it, but if you're open to that, I'd like to do that. But only if you are willing to have me do that. In other words, get a commitment. Don't just say, well, I'll send you some literature. Never send people literature and books unless you obtain from them a sincere commitment to say, I'd like to read that and see that. I said, all right, we'll send it to you. Otherwise, we're not. Don't tell them to send them something in the mail, because a piece of mail is not going to change them. The seventh is somewhat a surprise. It's called quick agreement. You're always enthusiastic when people agree with you. You say, well, we're there. But anybody in the sales and marketing line that's had any experience has learned long ago the perils of what is called the yes man. Because a yes man doesn't mean anything. It's really a device to get rid of you. It is meaningless. It shows little conviction about principles. It is designed primarily to get rid of you and shut you up. Many people actually will pray to receive Christ just to get rid of you. I read a story that time about a man, they kept calling him, telling him to receive the Lord, and he said finally agreed to do it. And he got out and he did what they wanted him to do, and he prayed to receive Christ, and he said with relief, and he said, and they never bothered me after that. Isn't that wonderful? He got rid of them. Oh, what was achieved was nothing, really, in any eternal way. Sometimes the answer is so perfect, they're so agreeable, and they thank you, and they may weep, they may hug you, they may promise you, and you never see them again, which seems stunning. It's like the people on the campus when you go out there and see them, they're going to meet you next Thursday, right? Everybody see a lot of yeses out there, but more often than not, you don't see them next Thursday, but they got rid of you. See? So, what that is a symptom, a very subtle one, of hiding and evading, isn't it? They got rid of you. They shut off the thing because they didn't want to talk about it. When people are doing that, the question is, what do you do? Well, hopefully you'll do the right thing, the beneficial thing. Evasions are not, in the long run, a closed door, but an evasion is a sign on the door. And the sign says, I'm not really happy about talking about this, at least at this time. Possibly not permanently. We would like to recognize the sign and, if possible, overcome it. Not with force, not with foot in the door, not with being overbearing and harsh, but with patience and with kindness, and especially not to accuse people, saying, you really aren't facing the issues, you're just avoiding them. Now that seems so obviously wrong. You wouldn't believe that as recently as a few weeks ago, that's exactly one of our key people did to a person. Said, you're just not facing up to the issue, you're avoiding it, it's because of sin in your life. Well, needless to say, the person didn't want to come back again. It's a direct frontal accusation. It's not designed to bring about a cooperative attitude. What are some suggested actions? First of all, encourage honesty, frankness, and say, I would like you to be frank. Say what is on your heart. I will assure you it will not offend me. Just tell me what is on your heart. You want me to be upfront with you? I would like you to do the same for me. I respect your opinion, and I don't mind at all listening to what you think. I will not be offended if you say, for example, I am not at all interested in this. That's okay. In fact, it's better than for us to go on and talk, and when that's their true feelings. We'd rather have them say that. A big objective for us in talking to people is always to find out where they stand. Even if it's not where we want them to stand, we need to know exactly where they stand, if possible. So you cannot do that if you do not encourage them to be honest, straightforward with you. The second thing is to listen without reacting. Now, that's very difficult at times. People have an opinion, have a stance that we don't agree with. Sometimes people have an amazing ability, as we say, to push our button. There's some people that seem to have a genius, a special gift for just knowing how to do that. And they delight to do that. But we don't want to let people manipulating us by pushing our button. We want to give them a good listen, a brief comment, without saying something like, well, I don't believe that. Well, how can you say that? This is something that you teach combat troops in military action. It's called hold your fire. Inexperienced troops, are always shooting at the first sign of the enemy on the horizon. They're firing wildly and hitting no one. I remember the story of the reenactment of the charge on Bunker Hill one time, and the famous expression is, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes. Maybe you don't remember that statement. And so to test this out, they had put 6 men up there on the hill dressed in American Revolutionary military uniforms, and 2 of them were nearsighted, and 2 of them were farsighted, and 2 of them were cross-eyed. So the farsighted people started firing when they were 100 yards away. The nearsighted people didn't fire till the bayonets were practically on them, and the cross-eyed people turned around and started firing toward Boston, see? The point is, you want to hold your fire. Don't just shoot wildly at a distance. Earn the right to be heard. Number 3, show sensitivity. I've been around a lot of sensitive people that have helped educate me. I haven't been educated to the extent that I need to be, I'm sure, about sensitive people, but it's important to develop in that area, I've found. I would say that sensitivity in dealing with people has to do with understanding their humanity. That's what it involves. It's understanding their humanity. It says of the Lord Jesus, in becoming man, he is touched with the feeling of our infirmities. Sometimes it's been said we are not sufficiently compassed with the feeling of other people's infirmities and weaknesses and sufferings, really. Sensitivity. We need to understand their frailty. The scripture says, Lord, teach me how frail I am. It says of God, he remembers we are but dust. He didn't have these giant expectations of us. We saw that with God when Elijah was fleeing from Jezebel, which is the most disgraceful action for the prophet, and he just fell down exhausted, and God came to him and he said, the journey is too heavy for you. Gave him something to eat, gave him some water, had him have a good night's sleep. That's too hard on you. And that's very tender, isn't it? I would have denounced him. What are you doing down here? Get yourself back up there where you belong. What kind of man are you anyway? He was very tender with him. The Lord showed that. You know, people have embarrassment and fear and pride and hurt. And these insensitive people dragged the woman taken in adultery in John in his presence, threw her at his feet, caught her in the very act. I think how embarrassing that is. Just caught in the very act. Dragged you out in front of the whole community. Look how sensitive Jesus is in dealing with her. Marvelous, isn't it? Fourth, you need to appeal to their interest. What is their chief concern? In a sense, that's the motivational issue. The one that I use most of with mothers, especially, is your kids. I raise an obvious question sometime. I said, "Do you love your kids?" And a woman said one time, "I'd die for my kids." I said, "Really? You'd die for your kids?" "Yes, I would." "But you wouldn't put up with their father because he's just beyond you to live with. Is that right?" Well, she'd never thought of it that way. He was just a person that was deeply unhappy in her marriage. One of these husbands, like so many of them, that didn't know thing one about women, really. We have an expression for them today in our society. They're nerds on that subject. That's hard for a woman. But I hit her. I said, "You do anything for your kids?" "Oh, let's see if you will. I'm not asking you to give your body to be burned and die in battle or put your body over them when they're being shot at or anything like that. We're just asking you to put up with this dunderhead you're living with for the sake of your kids. They happen to love their daddy." I never thought of it that way. I often appeal to people on the basis of kids. Marriage quarrels all the time. I say, well, the real question, I'm not favorable to you and I'm not favorable to you, but I'll tell you this. I'm definitely biased in favor of your kids, and I'll tell you right now, your kids, by and large, are not going to be blessed if their mother and daddy break up. Okay, you have a divided home. They're not going to be happy about that. I happen to be the child of divorced parents. I understand that very well. You got to find the motivational key. You got to appeal to their interest. What do they seek in life? What are they looking for in this situation? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? I ask people that come in with marriage troubles and they want to split up. And the thing I want to find out is, what do you want to do with your marriage? You want to just dissolve it, or you want to make it work? I say, well, we'd like to make it work. Well, on that basis we can talk. But if you don't want to make it work, there's nothing I can do to make it work. You have to have the desire to make the sacrifices to make your marriage work. That's what made marriages stick together without these high divorce statistics for generations. It was the sheer determination that, as far as they were concerned, divorce was not an option. They didn't think of it that way. That's what kept them together, and they worked it out. So I want to know that right at the top. I want to make a go of this marriage, and you want to work at it. All right, we'll start from there. If that's not true, neither I nor any other marriage counselor can help you. Rethink the situation. That is, see it from a different perspective. Maybe it's the same set of facts, but you have to look at it in a different way. Just the other day, I read a quotation from the inventor of the Polaroid camera, Dr. Land. How he came about to invent the camera. It was his little daughter. He was taking some pictures, and she said, "Daddy, how come it is that when you take a picture, you just can't have it right out before you right away? Why do you have to wait several days?" And he got to thinking about that. Why, indeed? And within a week, he had conceived of the process by which the Polaroid camera, instant development within the camera itself, was possible, and had invented it. And he made this statement that really struck me. He says, if you can define a problem, there is a possible solution. That appealed to me. If you can define a problem, then there is a possible solution. And we'd have to have them rethink it. I want to help you, I would say, to deal with the problem. I can't change the circumstances in many cases. What can you do when there's been a death or a tragedy? What can you do about that? You can't do anything about that. Some terrible injustice that has been inflicted upon you. What can you do about that? You can't change those circumstances. But you can have them rethink it from the standpoint of what is the most constructive way that they can deal with it, whether they just want to give up and roll over and die, dig a hole and crawl in, or whether they want to deal with it, especially in a godly way. But even if they're not Christians, there is a more constructive way to deal with difficult circumstances. And so we want to help them rethink it. Can't change circumstances, change the way you look at it. Maybe you don't know. You have no idea what the right thing is. Maybe you don't even know what to do. That's the right thing. You don't have a clue, as they say. All right, let's be sure you don't do the wrong thing. And you can make things worse by doing the wrong thing. An unwise word. You can make things worse. For example, number one, you can directly accuse them of not facing the issue. We've already mentioned that. Accusation doesn't work with people. It puts them on the defensive. It doesn't open their hearts to listen. There's only one that's an accuser of the brethren. That's called Satan. We don't want to be in his company. I often say to people, I'm not your judge, I'm not your jury, I'm not the prosecutor, I'm not the accuser. My job, I'm a people helper. That's what I do. I'd like to help you if you'll let me. No matter what you have done, though, I'm not here in the role of being your accuser. There are some people that come in, they want you to kick them. I've sensed that. Said that to people. You really would like me to kick you out of the office? I said, yeah. You feel you deserve it. You want me to punish you. I want me to kick you out of the office, take you downstairs, kick you down one flight, and then go downstairs and kick you down one more flight. Yeah, I'd like that. Well, what's the matter with them anyway? They want to be punished. I'm not in the punishing business. I'm in the helping business. Whatever they might be accused of may be true, but maybe you don't need to say it. What can we do to help them come to grips? Now you got an erring teenager. What can you do with a rebellious teenager that doesn't want to listen, doesn't want to obey, doesn't want to cooperate, doesn't want to live by the rules? Outright flagrant rebellion. Well, it's easy to say, well, you've been a lousy mother. Well, they already think they've been lousy parents. They spend all their time battering themselves anyway, assuming the responsibility for somebody else's misdeeds, which God will never let the evildoer do and get away with it. We don't come as an accuser. We come there as a helper. We want to help them face the issues without accusing them of not facing the issues. Maybe they don't know they're not facing the issues. Maybe they don't know how to face the issues. Number two, you get frustrated, angry, discouraged, rather than seeing divine opportunities. Well, you can feel those things. I feel them sometimes. I'm frustrated with certain people that I've tried to help. I get upset, angry with them for just ruining their lives and the lives of other people. It angers me. I get discouraged. I spend a lot of time with them and I don't see them pulling out of it. I get discouraged about it. But how does it help them, for me, to show these things? As we say, let it all hang out. Might feel good to you, but it doesn't help them. You can make things worse. You can build a new wall. You can create a new grievance. No, it's even when you do it the best of ways, you do the right thing. They can say, well, but you didn't do it in love. You're always vulnerable to that accusation. Consider the example of the Lord Jesus. In a remarkable way, he seemed to control outward frustration and discouragement. Rare occasion, he gets angry with the disciples. Rare occasion, he says, how long shall I put up with you? He does do that, but it's rare. It's exceptional. It needs to be exceptional with us. See every problem as a divine opportunity for the power of God to work, no matter how difficult it is. Mission impossible. Is anything too hard for the God? He asked the question. The obvious answer is no, there isn't anything too hard for God. The worst people's situation and the weakest person on the face of the earth. You're not an impediment to the power of God. There isn't anything that is an impediment. God can do anything He wants to do. There's nothing too hard for God. Unless don't adopt the attitude and say, yeah, except this person or except me. 3, don't accept their explanations as being completely true. It's very tempting to do that when they're telling you with such heartfelt feelings and tears and everything else. People are very convincing in justifying their actions, in criticizing other people, and in rationalizing their own activities. I listened to that for 30 minutes yesterday. Learn to probe with good questions and help them think. And learn this: suspended judgment, withholding judgment, is the greatest triumph of the human intellect. That's why God always saying, you wait till you hear what? The other side. Better learn to do that. Help them think. Is it really helpful to you in your interest, especially with God? What you're doing, how you're handling this. Well, God, accept your explanation or this other person's explanation. See evasive people as opportunities for godly wisdom when you detect hiding and evading. May God help you to have that discernment. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.